Yeah, good afternoon, class. I'm presenting on the last topic for the semester, developing e-business solutions. Essentially, we're going to look at some approaches that are used to develop e-commerce or e-business applications. And one of the typical approaches that are used very often is what we call a systemic approach. I believe you have met this in software development methodology. And it's just a problem solving using system orientation to define problems and opportunities and develop a solution. What does it mean? You try to orient the problem in a way as systems continue. So in other words, kind of an iterative process until they get something that is more or less close to the desired results. And of course, this problem solving involves the following interrelated activities. The first thing is that it recognizes and defines the problem or the opportunity using system thinking. And that's what I explained. Systems work through iterations until, and when they measure and they get something close, then they will exit and go to the next step. Then the second thing is that you develop and evaluate the alternates. So in other words, you develop different models and then you evaluate until you get one that fits closely to what you desire. The third thing is that you select the system solution that best meets the requirements. Then you can go on and design the selected system, and then you implement and evaluate, and you go on to do the maintenance and so forth and so on. So that is what we call the system approach. Now, prototyping is one of the system approaches that are used, and it's sometimes called rapid application development. What does it entail? The first thing under this process is to identify an end user's e-business requirement. So through your system analysis, you find out what exactly the end user wants as a system to help him do the things that he wants to do. So you do that by investigation system analysis. And then once you have got that, you go on to the next stage where you now develop the e-business solution prototype. Okay, again, it's the analysis design. So end users and information system specialists use application development tools to interactively design and test the prototypes of information system components that meet the end user's e-business needs. Now, what happens then? After that, you continue to revise the prototype to better meet the end user's requirements. So your initial prototype might not be exactly. So what you do is you refine that protocol using an iterative process. So you see the prototype cycle, it goes back to the develop, and then it comes to revise until it fits in. So at the point when you have to design or implement, the e-business system prototype are tested, evaluated, and modified repeatedly until the end user finds them acceptable. So that's what it's all about. So first you design or you develop, and then you test it with the requirements of the end user. And if it's not sufficient, you go back and fine-tune your design until it meets that. Now, once it meets it, then you exit, and then you design and implement the system. Now, once you have implemented, then you use the system, you maintain and acquire e-business and the accepted e-business solution. There is also a maintenance cycle. So once the system is designed and rolled out, over time, you need to maintain the system, improve, continuous improvement. So you go back to the revised prototype. Is there anything you can do better? and then it goes. So this, in a nutshell, is what we call the system development using prototyping. Now, once all these designs and things are done, there is a process of planning the entire deployment process. Once you have a good prototype, what happens next? You need to do an IT proposal for addressing the e-business priorities within whatever solutions you have. Now, once you do that, then you make a business case. You want to see whether it is profitable for the company to go in. What are the returns of investment once you do that? Now, if that one meets the board or the department management requirements, then you can go ahead and build the application. If it doesn't, you have to come back to using the feedback down process to adjust and improve the key objectives to ensure that it makes business sense. Now, if it makes business sense, then the business case is good and therefore can be implemented. Then you now have the action plan of how you're going to develop or implement the e-business application, the planning, the development, and the deployment. So that is what go on. So this is the process. First, the IT proposals for addressing with the key objectives for the process. Now, your business case must meet management or the board's requirement. If it doesn't, you need to adjust it iteratively until you get it right. Once you get it right, then you move on to the next stage where you do the planning, the development, and the deployment. Now, when it comes to the system design process, there are three key activities. The first one is the user interface design. Here, you design the screens, the forms, the reports, and the dialogues that are required to make the system work. Then you look at the data design. In other words, you're looking at the data elements, the structure, how do data move from one place to the other, and so forth and so. How do you control and make sure that the security of the data is in place? Once you do that, then you move on to the next stage where you look at the processes. Process design, you design the programs and the procedures. So in a nutshell, we have three main stages in the system design proper: the user interface design, the data design, and then of course the process design, all incorporated. Then when it comes to implementation of the project, once it's approved by the board or management, you need to acquire, the first step is to acquire the necessary hardware, software, and services, like internet services, if you have to, that are necessary. Then you also need to develop the software itself. Modify, either you buy it off the shelf and modify it, or you develop it from scratch. Any way you do it is acceptable. Then you also go in and do training. Once the system is ready, you train the users to understand the system. And then you also have to do documentation. Many people who develop software in Africa, and especially in Ghana, fail to do good documentation. So we see lots of good systems in the marketplace that when the original designer leaves, it's difficult to maintain, and so the system becomes obsolete and is thrown away. So system documentation, very crucial. So once all these things are done, the last thing is how to convert the system. If there is an existing system in place and you want to move on to a new system, you can run it in parallel. So you have the old system and the new, and then over time you convert to the new system only. That is what we call the parallel conversion. Then of course there's a pilot conversion where you just take a section of the entire organization and try to run it there to see how it works. And then you identify whatever errors. And once that is done, you can scale it to the entire organization. That's called the pilot um, system. Then there is what we call the phased conversion, where you do it in phases. Phase one, we're going to just, maybe you have a system that has 5 models. Phase one, we're going to do model 1 and do across board. Test it, make sure it works, then we add 3, then we add 4, and we add 5. That's what we call the phased approach. And lastly, we have what we call the plunge. And this normally happens when there's nothing on the ground. You don't have any system, you plunge into it. It means everybody just adapts it and then they go. You don't have to phase it or pilot it or parallel it and so forth. So that's that. And this diagram just shows a simple implementation of an intranet. So first you have the acquisition and installation of server hardware and software. You train the administrators, acquire and install browser software, acquire and install publishing software, and so forth. So this just gives you an idea of how this is done. Now, this is a typical example of an e-commerce system where you have clients being able to purchase from a merchant. So we have a client browser, we have a merchant web server. There's a payment system that enables payment across. So it verifies the merchant, receives orders info, receive payment info, and confirms the other. Then, of course, on the client side, on the merchant side, it verifies the customer, reviews payment info, and authorize or deny payment. Now, so this, in a nutshell, gives us an idea of how an e-commerce system can be deployed. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.